Hi, welcome back to my channel. This is a video about ADHD in women and males actually, and the difference between the two. Something that I find really interesting because, as I have mentioned in the past, I have had a mental health background. I always tend to say this, you probably heard me say it before if you've listened to any of my videos, but I go into that in the past. It's not related to ADHD, but I do think everything comes on a spectrum. The actual diagnosis I had was not ADHD, and I was not treated for ADHD. Obviously in treatment sessions you get treated for different situations. I've never been treated for ADHD, but I found this information really interesting, and I do, as I say, think everyone's on a spectrum. So sometimes people might have things like this happen, but they can also, either being aware of certain things can reduce shame that you might have brought on by having this sort of issue, even as someone that hasn't been diagnosed nor needs to necessarily be diagnosed, or if you do, I don't know. That can be something that you might feel like you might want to do, I don't know. That's obviously your call. But so basically, I don't know what that word was supposed to say. Oh yeah, so ADHD in women, let's start off with that. The difference between men and women is really interesting. So women were socialised to basically be good at organising, planning, and women often more so try to fit in than men because of like social pressures, and they're more likely to have anxiety, and more often have self-esteem issues, and they often internalize problems, and they can trigger warning if I'm going to talk about sort of issues around eating. So trigger warning about 30 seconds, or like no, 10 seconds, 15 seconds, something like that. So yeah, obviously eating disorders, you can develop an eating disorder if you have this sort of issue as well, and I do think that's something that I have been, I didn't have an eating disorder, but I did have issues around people. I do think this could be a reason why I didn't notice that that was what was actually happening. So I'm not trying to self-diagnose myself with ADHD here. I'm just saying, like, we're all on a spectrum for certain things. It's really interesting. Just because someone has ADHD doesn't mean other people aren't on the spectrum of this, that also can have this these issues. Like, just because someone's labelled as someone with ADHD does not mean that there aren't other people in the world that don't have ADHD related symptoms. The same goes for any illness. Depression, if you have depression, it doesn't mean that other people don't get sad days and they don't become depressed, even though if they don't have a clinical diagnosis. And I think this is actually a really good thing, and I think it's very, very obvious probably to some people, or it might be apparent to some people, but as someone that's been in the mental health system, can be hard to see the line between someone. I think there is a clear line between someone that's been diagnosed and someone that's not, because of the treatment that you get. But besides the treatment and the line of the, you know, treatment basis that you get, and obviously everyone has a different life journey, but everyone experiences these on a different level. So basically, women can also deal with impulsivity and hyperactivity, which can come in the idea of racing thoughts and talking too quickly and not thinking. Definitely someone that has experienced this, because men are often, I'm going to go into this in a minute, but men are often more, they externalize problems more, and they might become more like rule breakers, they might be more aggressive, so things like that. But women, interestingly enough, and men, I guess, yeah, it's both. They both can have, at different stages of life, and also during different hormonal periods of their life, can have more or less symptoms for this. So they can basically, due to your hormones, basically. So if you are in puberty, you might have higher levels of or ADHD might present more obviously. If you're postpartum, you might have higher levels of this, which is interesting actually. I would have thought, because what I found was really interesting was during pregnancy you have really low levels of hormones, but in postpartum you have really high levels. I guess it's something to do, and I always like to think of how we're evolved, or why we're made like that, if you like. I mean, so from that, obviously I've been gone, I think God makes us in our imperfect way, but it's like, I'm just interested, I suppose it's to do with looking after a baby and being on point when the baby's crying and stuff. But obviously sucks for people with postpartum depression, I suppose, because, you know, experiencing a hell of a lot more. But anyway, kids are difficult. That's not neither. I've got another few years to wait yet. So also after menopause, it kind of goes all round and everywhere according to this chart that was based on science of some form. I haven't written down the study name, but it was based on a study that I really should like quote some of the studies and where I got. I'll link below the video that I got all this information from, just so you know I'm not talking bullshit. So you can check it out for yourself if you want. So presentation and treatment. Low during pregnancy. Yeah, so then the treatment might have to change as well during those things, because I definitely think like while I was a teenager and I was experiencing puberty, I definitely, looking back, had, especially in puberty, I feel like I had a lot of just, I was anxious and internalized problems and just not thinking before speaking as well. I do think I had some issues with some other people because I would kind of just, I do chat like this, but I think when you don't have a filter when you're younger, like I don't think that's necessarily much of an issue, but I definitely think I was potentially on that level. So basically, you can also unfortunately create these labels around yourself when you do have this sort of an issue, where you can be like, for me even, I do these things for myself. Yeah, so I think it's just about how you go through life. Like if I was experiencing a level of what's the word that they use up here, impulsivity or hyperactivity, for example, when I left school, right, college, mainstream school, as anyone does, they enjoy a summer after school, right? So I feel like I labelled myself this rebellious, irresponsible person at that time, even though I was a complete bookie during school, which is another label, because I was a bookie because I wanted to fit in, because that's how we're socialised, and also because I had potentially inattentiveness, so I felt like I had to try extra hard to actually process the information, so I didn't allow inattentiveness to actually cause me any problems. I potentially had racing thoughts and anxiety, so I was trying to just focus on the work in order to not get anxious about the people around me. So yeah, and so then I would call myself bookie. I remember being in primary school, and I think I sometimes just was a bit forgetful about things, which is something that I had as I've gotten older. Obviously, you do kind of are socialised in life to, obviously, if you're being I know for a child, as a child I was very forgetful, but then they do say as you're going through childhood and puberty and I don't know about childhood actually, how your hormones are affected. I guess your hormones are quite low, but I remember, I honestly don't know, but when you're a child, you're changing loads, maybe your hormones are high, I'm not sure, but I know as a child I was very forgetful sometimes, and I was kind of like not teased by a teacher, but it's like kind of teased a bit in a playful way, but I don't think it did. I'm not sort of like blaming it now necessarily, but I do feel like I then created this thing for myself back then where I was like forgetful, and like she used to say like I'd lose my head if it wasn't screwed on. Like I'm not really just like getting really offended by that, because I don't think it was meant to offend me, but I think that could have been like something that I took forward to be hyper vigilant about the fact I wasn't going to then lose anything. But I suppose, here we go, something to be aware of, I think, just to, in order to because it can cause psychological damage to your self-esteem when you have people say stuff like that, and it's something that you have to undo as an adult, because you then like do like sort of, I do think like all evil works together for good, so even if they did say that, it might have propelled me to learn skills in order to not be like that. But equally, it's important to allow your self-esteem to be healed from things like that may have affected your self-esteem. So also, not to digress too far, also being messy. Apparently women can be more messy, whereas men like to be more neat. But I've definitely had it where I've had someone come to my house and say, oh, and to be fair, I was kind of messy because I was working a lot and staying at their house a lot, and sometimes I'd like leave dishes in my room. I actually have a few dishes in here at the moment because I live in a shared house and I'm not going down three flights of stairs to get to the kitchen every time I have a meal. So I've started to use paper plates because I can't bother to keep going up and downstairs. I actually think that's a great rule of thumb. So, and you can just chuck it away, clean and tidy, no issues. So I then internalised myself being messy and spacey because maybe I was inattentive, so I might have come across a bit like, you know, Way with the Fairies, and I've definitely had a Way with the Fairies, hence the word Dollytopia, you know what I mean? I've had that so much in life, so there we go. And also, and when you're a child, it's easy, just because you're not getting in trouble a lot. I think there's this, I don't know if it's necessarily a stigma, but I think when you think about stigmas of people with ADHD, sometimes you do think about that loud person in the class, and it's sometimes the case that can't keep their mouth together, and as we say, speaks too soon and blah blah. Fair enough, relevant, but I do think that also, that if you are one of these people that can have that thing where you can control yourself and you can basically, you might present as, it depends what kind of person you are, you might present as being, and a lot of other factors, that you might present as being that loud girl, or you might present as being a really quiet person, and you might try and hide and mask your symptoms, because you do often mask it in autism, and also in ADHD. You you have a lot of internal struggle sometimes, and you can internalize the issues you have because you're like ashamed, or you're trying to hide or be quiet. I've noticed that I think I was trying to be quiet and like hide from people because I was experiencing potentially hyperactivity and blah blah blah, so you'd kind of naturally want to isolate a bit, and because people talk about social isolation, which is something different to you wanting to isolate in school, where you're kind of just trying to be sane, if you like. So men can over report symptoms and women under report symptoms, which I found was really interesting. I think it can relate to social pressures, almost at the end now, if you're getting a bit bored and you're still with me. Men can, like, I think social pressures of men having that over masculinized social pressure can sometimes be like, oh yeah, well they might overdo the fact, and they might, I'm not trying to invalidate them, but they might have this like, oh yeah, I am aggressive sometimes, yeah I am, what's the other things that men do? I am a bit of a rule breaker, I do get a bit aggressive. Whereas women, they might not want to appear so masculine, if you like, for social pressure reasons. I'm not saying that's just or whatever, but I think women underreport it because either they're not recognised, they often, and women do want to conform a lot more as a gender often, and I'm not trying to be generalised. I know I'm very aware of different genders, and I'm not trying to say people that are trans or whatever are not in, like, I'm talking about social constructions and also biological, sometimes hormonal, not biological, hormonal constructions of how you can present if you obviously are in one of, like, you know, in a male or female gender as a baseline. I'm obviously aware there's a spectrum in between, let's put it that way, and I'm not trying to be judgmental of those people. I was like just talking about male and female. It wasn't supposed to be offensive to anyone. Just to put that out there, like, I'm not a transphobic or anything else, mixed gender phobic. So there we go. Definitely learned that one the hard way, of saying things sometimes where you don't mean it in a harmful way, but then some people can take it in a harmful way, and you don't necessarily mean it in that way, if that makes sense. So basically, but going back to it, it is a serious issue. Like, women can experience chronic pain. They can take a while in life. This woman was talking about how she takes ages she's still undoing the damage of a life of that kind of being prevalent in her life. And I think it's something that I can definitely learn from, of having these sort of things go on, because you develop ideas about yourself as you get older. You can get terrible self-esteem. You can then, that terrible self-esteem can go into having abusive relationships. And it's not, she said you shouldn't blame yourself for the way your brain works. Not to say that sometimes there isn't supposed to be interventions with psychology at times, and I'm not trying to dismiss that fact, if that's needed or if that's wanted, understandably, but you can cope by yourself for a long time. If it's something that you feel that you're really struggling with, or you're struggling with at all, and you don't get the support needed, it can be something where you can obviously have things where you can blame yourself, and just it can be difficult to do that. you can like self-medicate. Some men often self-medicate. They might just do things that are, sorry, yeah, as I said, women can get eating disorders and stuff like that. So I think if I would have been, I mean, I don't like to say if, when, maybe, like, everything comes when it comes at the end of the day. So I'm not trying to be like, we are all who we are. But yeah, I also thought something that was really interesting is this culture of work that we all seem to have adopted. Could it be that people that procrastinate are actually, because I think I was one of those book smart people in school where, perceived by someone else that didn't understand these symptoms, may have seen me as being very either overly intelligent or just like someone that is always working and they need to work harder, blah blah blah. But I think people with ADHD or on this spectrum can procrastinate a lot, and it's important to realise that it's not always constructive necessarily or productive, the way that people are sometimes focused on certain things or the way they mask or present themselves. So maybe some people are aware of that, but I don't know whether they always or other people were sometimes, or whether I was even aware of the fact I'm not, I don't know. It's just interesting to unpick these things. So yeah, that's the end of my video. Thanks for listening. Bye.